Good morning. Glad to be amongst you, and I'm glad to be back in my office where things are a little simpler to work and not as many distractions. We did a fair chunk of text last week. Proverbs 27:12 was it 6 through 12, and today we're going to take a look at Proverbs chapter 27:12 through 22. Um, some interesting things here this morning. Um, they should be. I don't want to say controversial, but they should be at least a little bit of fun. Um, so why don't we just get right into it? We'll start with verse 12. A very straightforward proverb, and we've talked about this in the past, but I'll just reiterate it one more time. The Proverbs routinely have a religious meaning. They can be talking about, especially that it talks about the importance of wisdom versus folly, that you should be seeking out to chase after wisdom. And then the Proverbs then teach us. They usually compare two things to one another. Maybe opposites, or they may be similar things. They compare them to each other, but that's oftentimes how Hebrews kind of talk about wisdom. Is they take two things and they're comparing, and Jesus does this a lot when he teaches. He consider, he'll start a parable by consider, and then he'll talk about various things. His parables often draw meaning by comparing one thing to another. The Pharisee and the publican, the Good Samaritan, the Levite, the priest, and the Good Samaritan. I mean, he's drawing comparisons, and by the comparisons, then we find meaning and learning. Not always are the Proverbs going to be speaking about specifically religious things, but drawing out wisdom from the world. And then I think something I've always thought is that there's a reason why we like underdog story movies or books. There's a reason why we love the idea of Deus ex machina in operas and in other stories, whereas what that means literally is God in the machine. So oftentimes operas would set up a problem in the 16th and 17th centuries. They would set up this problem that was almost intractable through a trap door in the opera stage and then solve all the problems. Well, we like this because my feeling has always been that the wisdom of God, his plan, his will, what he is doing, undergirds everything in creation. It permeates all written forms of all written word. It permeates art. It permeates our culture, our speech, how we interact with one another. So it's no surprise we find ourselves gravitating towards these stories. It's Rocky made 6 sequels to a movie that's basically the same movie. And the reason is because we love the idea of someone we didn't expect to win. Because I think underneath everything is, even from the foundation of the world, perhaps God puts this on our heart. He writes it on our heart. He writes this story that is the death and resurrection of Jesus, and just innately, without even knowing it, we gravitate towards it because it is the story. It is the only story that matters. So you look at great works of literature that are kind of Christian in nature. You think of like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, C.S. Lewis. You think of Lord of the Rings, which has Christian overtones. And what is the story here? Well, when all hope was lost, right? somehow good prevails, right? Somehow, without it really making any sense. In other words, according to human reason, they shouldn't have won, but they did, because there's a bigger plan, there's a bigger will story at play that's happening. So, what I mean by all of that is to say, I think wisdom is from God. And I mean that very literally. Like, all wisdom that we see comes from God. And we can put our fingers on it. Things in the world that are just common sense, right? But even the common sense little things have a larger meaning because they come from God, because He undergirds all of creation, right? So I think what we'll do is we'll interact with the majority of, I've looked ahead to the verses here, and the majority of the verses are dealing with common sense, worldly living kinds of things, right? But there will be some places for us to make maybe some analogies, maybe some connections. I don't necessarily think we have to hold them up to be gospel truth, but we can take some joy in them, think about them, and in all circumstances, as we're going through Proverbs, our pursuit should be to become wise. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So wise, the wisdom first comes from God, and then that wisdom helps us to be wise in the world as well, right? It's a dual purpose kind of thing. So we'll take a look at some of these things, and we'll just take them as they stand, and then maybe we'll try to dive a little bit deeper and see if there's some hidden spiritual, religious meaning, Christological significance to these sayings today. Okay, so we'll start with verse 12. The prudent sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it. And I think I'd love to find out what this word for simple is. Let's take a look at that. Was it patayim? Patayim, the simple. Okay. And we have some meanings here: simplicity, foolish, open-minded, naive. Okay. Probably fool here, I think, would be a good meaning. It seems as though the verse itself is not dispersing, casting a dispersion of a negative one, right? So just foolish might be a good translation, as opposed to, I'm sorry, simple as opposed to foolish. Foolish has a negative connotation. Simple maybe is a little more open, neutered, non-judgmental. Can't think of the right word here, but it is maybe clear of that kind of stuff, right? So let's take a look at what prudent here is. My son, be wise. Let's see, 12. A prudent man. Okay, so let's prudent, subtle, shrewd, crafty, sly, sensible, prudent. So someone who can look at a situation and discern the problems they're in, right? Maybe a guy, someone with a sharp enough mind to see a situation for what it is. And I think that's a good definition of prudent. In fact, why don't we, since we've got time, let's actually look up the English definition of prudent, see if it matches with what the Greek is telling us. Acting with showing care and thought for the future. I think that's actually a great definition, and it's a great translation, right? Because it seems to be what the proverb is actually telling us here. 4 C's, yeah, 4 C's, ra'ah, ra'ah. This is fun here. Well, let's take a look at this. We got 2 different words here, but they sound the same. Yeah, a prudent man. So arum, ra'ah, ra'ah. Okay, and what we have here is the word. This is a verb. Let's take a look at this word here. Yeah, Ra'ah. This is to see. Okay. And then the next word, and I want to see if I can I want to show you the difference. Okay. So if this makes any sense here, I'm going to put it up on the screen here for you to see, so you can actually see there's a difference between the two. Okay. And then we have evil, which is, okay. So this won't make a lot of sense. Okay. But Ra'ah here, this is an R sound, and then Aleph is a guttural ah sound. So you start it with a glottal attack with your vocal cords, like that, and then let's kind of a sound, Ra'ah, Ra'ah, and this is Ra. This is the R again, but this is a different letter. And this is an ayin, and this is an Aleph, and this is an ayin. And the ayin has a similar sound, but they're a different glottal attack. So what you get is two different words that sound very similar, right? So this is one of those places where people have asked me, do you have rhyming in Hebrew? Not like you would have it in English, but there's like these little almost puns, right, where you get two words that sound very similar. Ra'ah, ra'ah. And Hebrew does this quite a bit, where it'll put two words next to each other that sound similar but have disparate meanings, or maybe they're connected together, like one's a verb, one's the noun, but it is. I learned this from Linda Nix, that there is a thing called I think the way she does it is they go like this, because Linda Nix does sign language, and I think that there's I might be doing the sign wrong, but I think I remember that deaf people say hearing person joke. I think, I'm not 100% sure, but there is such a thing, because since they cannot hear sound, they understand that there are certain jokes that have to do with being able to hear that the deaf people can't understand. So I think that's what's going on here. That, like a pun is where we take one word and we basically use a pun is where you're kind of going along and you're expecting the one definition or the one understanding of the word, and instead you get the other, or perhaps the word sounds similar, right? That's where the joke is. I think this is the same thing here, where there's just this little bit of a word play. Ra'ah, ra'ah. A prudent man foresees evil. He's seeing into the future, and you see evil coming. Funny little, poetry moment there, I suppose. Then we have and hides himself, right? Let's what do we have here? To hide, to conceal. That's pretty much it. To hide oneself. That makes sense. To conceal would be to make yourself not seen. So that where we get to hide oneself, or in this context here, then, where it says, my ESV says hides himself, right? Okay, but the simple go on and self-report. Let's talk a little bit about meaning then. I think this would be retirement planning. This would be health screenings. This would be a variety of ways in which we would make plans for the future. We have a fairly long history in our synod. I should say that's not true. There was a disagreement in our synod at one time about whether it was right or wrong to buy life insurance. In the sense that you're kind of testing God. Is God going to take care of us or not? Do I, as a widow or potential widow, buy life insurance on my husband, not trusting the Lord that he'll take care of me even if my husband passes? There is something to be said about this, where we have, in times past, before life insurance was a thing, we would probably save money in some way to take care of ourselves, or we would rest upon the goodwill and the care of the community and the neighborhood that we lived in. The towns were smaller. We knew each other. And so when someone was in need, it was the church's responsibility, it was the community's and the town's responsibility to take care of that person. I'm not arguing with insurance. I don't think it's a bad thing. But there has been a process where we've taken more and more and more on ourselves, where we've made conscious decisions to take care of ourselves and put less and less on our community. So we become more and more isolated in the way that we think and in the ways in which we purchase financial vehicles, right? I'm not even going to think for a second about being dependent upon my neighbors. Rather, I'm going to take decisions into my own hand and make sure that things are controlled. Again, I'm not necessarily arguing that insurance is bad. I'm just saying I think there were implications to the decisions that we didn't really take into account and think about long term. Yeah. God seems to be saying that one should prepare for the future, or at least prepare for the things that he sees coming. Simple people don't watch out for the things that are coming. I don't know what else to add here, except that there are times where I think we can see exactly what's coming, and we're called nonetheless to stand and give an account. I think this verse is dealing with more regular life, regular day kinds of things. But like, for example, Luther to diet of worms. He stands and makes his confession knowing exactly what's going to happen to him when he does, right? So it's not that he doesn't see what's going to happen. He knows what's going to happen, but he accepts that reality. So I think perhaps these things are dealing with more run-of-the-mill, earthly, regular day sorts of things, because there doesn't seem to be any connotation of in the verse itself dealing with good and evil and whether a person should make a stand or not. So perhaps if you're sick, a person might save some money. If you're near death, a person might prepare for their funeral. These kind of things that are going to happen. Okay, not a lot more there. Verse 13. Take the garment of him. I'll read out of the ESV here. Excuse me. Take a man's garment when he has put up security for a stranger, and hold it in pledge when he puts up security for an adulteress. And now I have a connection here to adulteress, which actually says that it could be just a foreign woman. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an adulteress, but I think in interactions, if you look at the biblical narrative, the actual story itself, the majority of the interactions with Gentile women for Hebrew men has been this respect. Thinking of Samson, thinking of Judah's interaction with Tamar, I believe, as she's looking for a son. He assumes her to be a Gentile prostitute along the way, but she's not, but that's the case. So most of the examples of contracts with foreign women are of this nature, which is why I'm thinking that we get the translation then of from foreign woman to seductress, because the majority of the stories in the Old Testament, that's what ends up happening here. Okay, what are we saying here? Well, I think it actually goes very much along with verse 12 before it. That's why I know I dealt with verse 12 last week, but I wanted to start there and then move down this week. There seems to be an overall sense of business acumen here. And anyone who's been married knows that monetary issues are a huge part of marital relationships. So what I mean by that is to say, living a life in the world necessitates good economic decisions, right? When you're making poor economic decisions, life can be very hard. And then when life is very hard, we find ourselves maybe being angry at God, struggling with earthly issues. So in other words, money issues are not necessarily the most important issues we'll deal with. Money issues are not the be all end all of everything, but money issues affect everything else. They affect your flexibility in order to do the things perhaps that you want to do or the things that you should do, right? This is a big part of the Dave Ramsey when you go through it. He's trying to make a case that if we get this part of life under control, it makes the other parts of life easier, right? Which I would agree with, right? So we have a business acumen discussion here, and it is we might be asking ourselves, why take the garment of a stranger, right? And it says here, put up a security, okay? And here in the translation, the ESV says security. Here it says a pledge, exchange, a surety, right? Okay, so going into a bad business decision here, right? Someone is giving a surety or a pledge, like he's saying, I've gone into business with this stranger, don't know him. I'm going to make a pledge that this business agreement is good. What do you do as a person who is prudent, according to verse 12? Well, we take his garment in pledge. The person, and I'm assuming that what we're getting at here is, it seems like there's three people in the story, right? We have you, we have the one who's made the pledge to the third person, the stranger. And then in the second part of the verse, you have you, the one who's made the pledge to a foreign woman, or as we get, prostitute, whatever. So what do we do to make sure that person B keeps his word, even though he's entered into it almost seems as though we're obligated to help person B, right? We're obligated to help person B, but we want to be prudent about helping person B. So what we're going to do is we're going to take their cloak as a surety that they're going to make good on this agreement. Now, we might ask, why take the cloak? Well, cloaks were often used as multi-purpose things. They were used not only as clothing, but in a pinch, out on the prairie, out on the shepherding areas, could be used as a blanket, a covering, even a tent. They were usually handmade, and they were expensive. In the world that we live in now of machine looming and machine sewing, clothing is much less expensive than it used to be. So back then, this is a down payment. This is a pledge, right? This is a substantial amount to hold in pledge to make sure that person B honors their agreement to person A, because they're making an agreement with someone who is. In other words, you have a friend, he comes to you, he has this business arrangement with a sketchy person. How do you honor, like the 9th and 10th commandment? How do you love your neighbor as yourself, maybe the great commandment, and still be prudent about things? And the answer is you take your neighbor's cloak in pledge, right? Does that make sense? It's interesting. I think it's pretty straightforward. I wonder if there's a stretch where you could talk about the fact that Jesus's cloak was taken and, raffled off basically between the people at the bottom of the cross. Could we make a connection? Let's see. not really. It's a stretch. We'll just head on. Verse 14. Whoever blesses his neighbor with a loud voice, rising early in the morning, will be counted as cursing. Now, my wife would love this verse. Not a particularly fond early riser. And the Bible is literally pointing out, I think this is hilarious. It's literally pointing out that going out early in the morning, and the assumption is, right, you might be thinking, well, what's the problem here? I think we have to assume that early morning means early enough where you're waking people up out of their slumber. Okay, that's the only way the verse really makes sense. So going out and giving loud blessings, which that's important too. I think that yeah. So we have here gadol, which is the word for loud. Okay. So it very roughly it goes, he who blesses his friends with a voice, a loud one, in the morning. See, then I think you get a little more of the connotation what the verse is trying to express. Blesses they with a voice, a loud one, right, in the morning. His blessing will be counted as a curse. Right, and the blessing is a pretty typical word for blessing, Mubarak, right? This is used really commonly in the Old Testament. Usually it's used amongst people to each other, if I remember correctly, right? So if I want to bless you as a person, we use this word. When God blesses his people, it's a different word, right? To connotate the difference between those two things. So this would be, a good word would be a blessing word, maybe not as strong as another word for a, like a good morning, God's peace to you, blessings, something like that. Not necessarily the Aaronic blessing, something as strong as that. Okay. I went and got scooters today. If you have these little cups, you can get a refill of coffee for 90 cents. That's a deal, man. That's a deal. So, you shouldn't wake up people, and I can give a real world example of this. Our daughter Esther routinely comes in the morning when my poor wife is trying to sleep. I have to admit, lately with the cold weather and the sun, we've been kind of a little sleepy in the morning. I to my shame. So, 7 o'clock, they come rolling in. Esther comes rolling in at 7 o'clock or earlier. And I'm usually just kind of laying there. I'm not 100% asleep. I usually wake up around 6 o'clock, and then I just kind of lay in bed for a little while longer, and then I get up. So I'm laying there. I'm kind of half awake. Laura's out. And the Esther comes in, and I hear her come in, and I say, what do you need? Come over, talk to me. Don't talk to mom. Don't wake her up. Of course, she goes straight to mom, till Laura finally like, what? And then Esther goes, I love you. And then she runs out of the room. Sure, the sentiment is nice, but the approach and the way one goes about it, not great. So I think that's what's going on here. A person, people can do this a lot. They can reach out and try to want to, give blessing and bring blessing, and they're doing it in ways that belie what they're actually trying to accomplish. Fun stuff. All right, 15. This is I'm just gonna read what the scriptures say, okay? Don't come at me and make me the bad guy here, okay? So verse 15, a continual dripping on a rainy day and a quarrelsome wife are alike. To restrain her is to restrain the wind, or to grasp oil in one's right hand. I'm just reading here, okay? This is, don't be angry at me. So I can attest to this. There are numerous things outside. Um, when you have lots of little kids, you've got all kinds of things outside: bikes, tricycles, and perhaps we shouldn't have so many things. That's always been an argument of dad, but that rarely gets to be talked about. We have things sitting outside that shouldn't be getting rained on, shouldn't be getting wet. And so then when the water comes, you get real irritated, right? Plus, we live in a wet area of town. We're doing our best to mitigate that water and get it out. But whenever water comes down and extensively, you get worried about it. You worry it's going to seep into the house. So in other words, you get irritated about the water, especially as it falls. Sometimes it's too falls, but there's really nothing you can do about it. You can't stop the rain. You can't go out and tell the rain clouds to stop. You can't do much about it when the rain's coming down. There just isn't much to do, and that's what the verse 16 here is. To restrain restrainers to restrain the wind. It's trying to stop the rain on a rainy day. It's impossible, or to grasp oil in one's right hand. So then the middle two verses here. Do you see that? So 15a and 16b, I think, go around. So we have kind of a little hendiasis, right? We have. Let me write it out so we can kind of see it. Okay. And A and B relate to one another, and B and A relate to one another. If that makes any sense here. So 15A and then B, and then 16A and then B. So A relates to the B of 16, and the B relates to A of 16. That makes any sense? So, taking a look at that, let's look at the two center pieces then. And a quarrelsome wife are alike. To restrain her is to restrain the wind. And then I think 15a. I don't think. Let's look at the text here. So we have continual. It's a really straightforward word, continuous. Let's see here, rainy, steady or persistent rain, right? That's interesting. So I'm, we used to call these in Breckenridge. My farmer friends would call this soakers. You get a soaker rain where it just kind of rains lightly, but it rains all day long and it just doesn't stop. Maybe for several days, it'll be overcast and it'll just kind of rain slowly all day long. Now that we get in Sioux Falls, we get these monsoon rains that just hit and then they're gone. You know what I mean? But no, a rain that just hangs around and it's just kind of raining all day long, right? This continuous rain that just won't stop. This is similar to a quarrelsome wife. Let's take a look at this word for quarrelsome. Okay. Strife, contention, contentious, right? Let's look that up more. What else do we have here? Brawling, discord, so in my past, in my life, I have come across people in general, right? Men and women, who can be very contentious, who can be very quarrelsome. One word I'm thinking about in modern usage would be pessimistic. Yeah, very negative outlook on life in kind of everything. That I've seen that more often than not. Someone who has just a very negative outlook all the time, and it can be, the dripping of the water can split apart rock. It can wear down concrete in a matter of years. So I think this is the idea of quarrelsome. Just I think a negative outlook, a pessimistic outlook, and it's like the dripping continual rain. It just never stops. It just keeps coming. It's always that way, right? And trying to restrain her is like trying to grasp oil in your hand. It's like trying to restrain the wind. I am not sure exactly what this proverb is trying to get across, because the thing that I can't understand is what direction do we go, right? Divorce is not something that God looks kindly on, right? He's not something that he wants. So how do we deal with these things? I know, isn't that typical? Whenever it's hard, there's never any verses. Whenever it's like a modern, hot button issue, there's never any issue, any meanings. I'm gonna speak. I'm gonna speak of my own life for a minute. I would say that my wife has a fair amount of complaints about me, but I think overall she's happy. So I wonder if verse 15 is getting at. First of all, I don't want to completely get rid of the idea that this is a problem, right? I usually suggest this book for my couples that are getting married, called Love and Respect. And one of the main tenets of the book is that husbands are called to love their wives unconditionally, right? So in other words, even if they're being difficult or hard, they're supposed to love them no matter what. Wives are to respect their husbands unconditionally, even if they're not really worthy of respect. Now, these two things are very hard to do. They're very hard to do. But it is the nature of how husband and wife can actually live together and love one another is there has to be some sacrificial giving of love and respect sometimes, because sometimes the person's not going to live up to it. And then sometimes the sacrificial giving is what makes people live up to it, right? A husband being loved unconditionally is going to make him live up and be someone worthy of respect. Sometimes you've got to jump across the chasm, have a bit of faith, and do things that don't necessarily, like not being so calculated. I'm going to do this, I'm going to get this. Sometimes you sacrificially give without any promise that the love is going to come, right? You respect without any promise that the husband's going to love you unconditionally, or you love without any promise that you're going to be respected unconditionally. And that's how you sacrificially love someone and make a marriage work, right? So I'm not saying that I think being quarrelsome is okay and should be excused. It isn't. A wife is called to unconditionally respect her husband. But at the same time, it seems to me that the verse is saying to the person, if we consider that the Proverbs are written predominantly to men as fathers of households to learn and then teach that wisdom to their children, to their family, right? So if that's the idea in mind, like I'm writing the Proverbs so I can teach other men like me how they should operate life. So that context, right? So you're saying, it seems to me that you're saying to the guy, if you think you're going to restrain a quarrelsome wife with your hand, you're living in a fantasy world. That's ridiculous. It's not going to work. And then you have to ask the question, well, how do I deal with a quarrelsome or a contentious wife? Well, maybe it alludes to the problem that lies underneath all of this. Perhaps you haven't loved her as you should. Because a wife who is loved respects, and then loves her husband in return, right? I mean, I don't know. That might be stretching, might be diving too deep. I think there is the reality that there are just some folks that are really unhappy, and they're going to be unhappy no matter what you do. And that's a shame. But again, I don't know how the verse works unless we're assuming from the very beginning that God thinks divorce is bad, right? I don't think this verse is saying, hey, a contentious wife is like trying to hold on to oil, so just get rid of her. I don't think that's saying that. That doesn't make any sense. So the only other option here is that there has to be, maybe this is a rebuke against a man who is trying to restrain her through means of force as opposed to means of love. You know, what's that? Honey is sweeter than vinegar. How's that phrase go? You catch more flies with honey as opposed to a net or vinegar or whatever it is. Verse 17. Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. Verse, we have a little here. There's a secondary translation that could lead us to say iron sharpens iron, and one man's face sharpens the face of another. That's another possible translation. This is true. Iron does sharpen iron, but typically what happens is that the iron that is here's an example that's real life. You can drill holes in metal with metal drill bits. How does this work? Well, the steel drill bits that drill through metal are usually hardened. How are they hardened? They're hardened through heat treatment. You heat metal up till it's red hot, and then you dunk it in oil, and that's called tempering it. And tempering it, what it does is it aligns all of the molecules in such a way that makes the steel very hard, right? And then there are other processes that are done. I don't want to go into the depth of that, but the point is that now that metal becomes hard enough to drill holes in other metal. Now, an interesting thing too that can happen is if you take that same drill bit and you're drilling through metal, and maybe you're doing it in the wrong way. You know, when you drill metal, you're supposed to put a little oil in the hole so that your drill bit stays cool, right? But if you don't do that, that drill bit can heat up, and then the heat from that drilling can actually take the hardness out of the drill bit, and now it won't cut through anything. So iron can sharpen iron. And it seems that so iron sharpens iron. How does it do? And one man sharpens another. So a man sharpens the countenance of his friend is how it's the rough translation in the Hebrew. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I see your note there, Stephanie. I would agree with that. Who we associate with will determine which way we're sharpened. Yeah. This is a tough question to answer. You know, as people who live in Christ and live in the gospel, knowing the forgiveness of sins and the salvation of Jesus Christ in the cross and in his resurrection, we are people who want to share that truth with other people. It becomes difficult to understand, though, exactly what our relationship should be with people outside of people that, as the verse says here, would sharpen us in a positive way versus a negative way. And how much of this is changed because of Jesus Christ and him ushering in the kingdom of heaven. Many things from the Old Testament are deemed not necessary more. The sacrificial offerings, the sacrificial system, that goes away because Christ has made one sacrifice for all sins for all time. The civil law, being specifically Jewish because of the things you do. No, now we're a kingdom in Christ, and so it is him who defines us, not the ways in which we operate. So Christ does away with the civil. He does away with the ceremonial, the sacrificial system. What's left behind is the moral law, the 10 Commandments. So the question we have to ask ourselves is this verse part of the moral section of the law or not? I think it is. Being with someone who sharpens you, I think it possibly goes beyond a small relationship, acquaintance type relationship or a collegial relationship. This is someone who's part of your life, who, a friend, close friend who's pushing you, who maybe you're in study with, Bible study, who you go to church with, perhaps. Or a family member, perhaps, that's another believer, but you share the same belief structure, these kind of things. So we have to be careful who we're using or who we're sharpened against, because that can lead to good places or bad places. I think that there are sometimes, people take the evangelism angle maybe too far, and they're so caught up in sharing the good news with people that is their primary group of people. They're not in church regularly. They're spending all their time with non-Christians. There is a balance there. We have to be supported and fed by word and sacrament ministry. We have to be surrounded by the consolation of the brethren so that we have a base, so that we're sharpened enough that we can go out into a world that's going to try to push us in other directions and not fold, not go that direction, right? So we have to have a solid base. Foregoing that base completely and stepping away from it for the sake of evangelism would be a mistake. Primarily, you are a Christian person. You are a child of God. The very first thing that you need to do is to be selfish and to be fed. So you need to be gathered on word and sacrament to be fed. Then secondarily, and I'm not sure you would make these priorities in your life that are 1 and 2, but I think you have to look to your own concerns first and foremost, right? I'm not saying this defines you as a person, but you've got to realize that I've got to be fed word and sacrament before I can give other people word and sacrament. This is one thing they teach us very much, the doxology program for pastors, is that you've got to be in your Bible study, you've got to be in your devotion, you've got to be in the Book of Concord and feeding yourself all of this if you're going to be able to give it to anybody. And if you don't, eventually you're going to be giving so much and have not resupplied or filled it back up within yourself that you're going to burn out, right? And the same thing is true in life. So the peoples with whom you are sharpened against, very important. It's important who you're sharpening yourself against, and if you're sharpening yourself against someone who's going to lead you away from God as opposed to towards God, that's not a good thing. This is also a very commonly used verse for Bible studies, online videos for Christians, things that iron sharpens. I think iron sharpening iron or iron sharpens iron is a KFUO broadcast. That's the name of it that they use. So, which makes sense. Describing a Bible study like that would be a place where we would sharpen one another, right? Challenge one another. My hope was always that we were very much a people who, on this online Bible study, but in Bible study in general, is that I'm always looking for people to speak to me as much as I speak to them. And we have an absolute treasure of well-trained theologians of this congregation who routinely teach me. I'm thankful for that. Verse 18. I hope that's enough on that. If it isn't, hit me with a question in the comments, or you can text me a question on my phone. And if that's not enough, I know it's a really important verse. I hope we've dealt with it in its entirety. Verse 18. Whoever tends a fig tree will eat its fruit, and he who guards his master will be honored. There is a when we were studying Luther during the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, they put out a video talking about the things leading up to the Reformation itself, and the Luther movie, the new one, and then the things post-Reformation, right? How did Luther and the Reformation, maybe we should be careful, we don't want to make Luther into some kind of god, but how did the Reformation affect the world? And one of the things was that this idea of a work ethic became a thing, categorized, a defined thing, work ethic. It comes out of a lot of places. I know one off the top of my head is, Luther's advice about how to be a good Christian cobbler, and his answer is to make the best shoes possible. Not to put gospel tracts in every pair of shoes, but to make the best shoes possible and to sell them for a reasonable price, and treat your neighbor, in other words, sell them and treat your neighbor with respect and love. I mean, you should get paid for what you do, but you should also try to work within the bounds of your community, selling things at a price that you're a good quality product that your neighbor can afford, right? So this idea of work ethic comes out that in order, vocation, in order to be, how do I be a Christian post office worker? Well, you work as hard as you can, and you're the best post office worker you can be. How do I be a good Christian farmer? Well, you work as hard as you can at your farming, and you be the best farmer that you can be, and you treat your neighbors with love and respect. I love you, love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself, right? And this is not complicated stuff. So we get to verse 18. It seems that that's kind of reiterating our understanding of vocation and, work ethic, hard work, right? Whoever tends a fig tree will eat its fruit. There is, I can't help but think about the do not muzzle the ox as it's treading out the grain. And, this used in reference to pastors. Paul never took any money from any of his churches, but he did say that pastors ought to be able to derive a living from the ministry that they were providing to churches, right? And it seems that that's what this verse is saying. Maybe in the opposite way, Paul's saying you should pay a pastor. This verse seems to be saying if you put in the work, right, there will be rewards. I.e., if you tend a fig tree, you will eat of its fruit, and he who guards his master will be honored. Okay, by the master. Yeah. It seems pretty straightforward. I don't know if we need to delve too much deeper in that. If you have a question on that, well, hit me up in the comments. Excuse me. Verse 19, as in water, face reflects face, so the heart of man reflects the man. A mirror was a relatively, mirrors were always something that were around. You can make mirrors by using bronze and then putting, I believe it's silver nitrate on bronze, and then you buff it to a sheen, and you get a mirror that wouldn't be maybe as good as the mirrors we have now, but would be accurate or would be pretty good in seeing a reflection. So it's not as though mirrors weren't around, but they weren't consistent and they weren't a thing that everyone had, right? So mirrors don't become it's a very interesting question because they don't become very common at all until during the Reformation and after the Reformation. People are starting to see their own reflections. There are people who could afford to see a vision of themselves, or people who could afford one of these expensive kind of handmade mirrors, or someone who had a portrait done of themselves, right? The common people didn't really see. When you start seeing the common people get an understanding of themselves, even how they look, right? They get an image of their own reflection, things like this. It's interesting. It changes how people think in the Reformation era, and they begin to stop thinking so much communally and start thinking more individually. Nevertheless, there is the idea that a person can see the reflection in the water. And we've all seen the reflection of our face in a stream or in the water. We know what that's like. It's not a perfect reflection, but it's a pretty clear one. We can make it out what's going on there. So water can reflect your face. You can see what you look like. And so then the heart of a man, what he does reflects who he is, right? I think that's what it's getting at here. The heart. Let's take a look at the word here and see what we have for the heart of a man, okay? So the heart, exactly what you expect. The lave, it's a very common word for heart. The inner man, the mind, the will, the heart, the understanding, the inner part. Let's see. Conscience is another possible definition here. So the inner heart. We have a little bit of a rhyme here too. So we have Cain lave. That's the word for heart. Cain lave. Ha'adam la'adam. Ha'adam la'adam. So we have we would take they take the man, the first one, ha'adam, that's the noun. I think we would understand that's the subject, right? A man's heart reveals a man's, and how does it translate here? The man's heart. Okay, yeah, the heart of a man reflects them. That's actually pretty good. Yeah. So the heart of a man reveals a man, reflects the man. Yeah. So his for the word heart again, we have understanding, inclination, determination of will, resolution, knowledge, thinking, reflecting, memory, the moral character, right? Almost makes me think of the word nephesh too. Kind of this entire gathering up of a man, right? His soul, his mind, his heart, his physicality, right? So a man's innermost parts, his innermost thinkings and feelings, his innermost ways reflects who he is. Yeah. I think that's true in the world. You can't hide these sorts of things. You can't disguise them. They become clear over time. Who a man is. That this is my one true hope in life. I know who I am as a father. I know who I am as a husband. And I hope that who I am as a pastor will be revealed by my actions over time. Because there's no way I can prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt other than who I am, what I do, how I love, those kinds of things. Okay, we were trying to get to 22 today. Let's see if we can get there quick. Shaul and Abaddon are never satisfied, and never satisfied are the eyes of man. Well, Shaul and Abaddon, let's look up Abaddon just so we can get that one, because that's probably a new one for you. Shaul is the Hebrew idea of hell. It's being separated from God. And Abaddon, perishing, something lost, a lost thing, destruction. We have destruction here. Yeah, that's interesting. So we have Shaul, Va'abada. They're never full. Tisbana, to be satisfied, to be sated, to be fulfilled, to have excess, to enrich, to satisfy. Yeah. So I think we understand that, the where Jesus says clearly at one point, says where I think he talks about Gehenna, where the fire never goes out, the worm never is quenched, the fire never quenched, the worm never stops. This idea that like the punishment, the fires, the destruction, the all the stuff of hell never ends. It's a place of eternal torment, right? So that is we're comparing one thing to another. So I think people can understand the first concept, right? The eyes of a man are never satisfied. This is why we were just studying this not the other day on Sunday in church. We were talking about, it's very strange where Paul is talking about some of the worst kinds of sins, and covetousness makes the top of the list. I mean, it's right up there. Wanting to have other things, wanting to have other people's things. It's a dangerous sin, because covetousness can lead to the seventh commandment, can lead to the fifth commandment. It definitely leads right to the first commandment. Satisfaction. I can't remember who told me this, if it was my dad or if it was another professor at seminary or someone, but being satisfied is wanting the things that you have. It's a hard thing to do. Wanting the things that you have. I have to admit, even I struggle with this problem. I think there are ways to mitigate it. There are ways to help you deal with lack of satisfaction. I think regularly making I call them thankfulness lists. Just sit down and make a list of all the things which God has blessed you with. And the point of the list, as in the catechism, as in the scriptures, is to get very specific, right? Every single little thing you can think of. And it doesn't, and I should say, it doesn't be every, but make a list as much as you'd like, and make them very specific, and realize that in the specificity and in the number, we can also see the macro, right? God gives me everything that I need. And then look, here's all the specific ways in which he works that out. And maybe I can, instead of turning my eyes towards what I don't have, I can actually turn my eyes towards what I do have, right? Very important. And I think one of the other methods that you need to stick with is the people in your life, whether it be your wife or your friends or your children, even just having them politely remind you, just tell them, all right, hey, when I'm looking over my neighbor's fence, would you remind me about all the good things that I have? And my wife has been an indispensable benefit in respect of this, and I've tried to be it to her as well. When we sit around and covet things we don't have, we try to remind each other that there are many things that we do, right? Covetousness is an especially dangerous sin, because if God wanted you to have something, you'd have it. And when we want to have something that we don't have, we're going directly against God's will. This is not what he's ordained for us. This is not what he's wanted us to have. Dave Ramsey also says, too, that's interesting. I brought him up twice now today. That's weird. God might be asking you a question. You're sitting in a situation where perhaps you've got some things, you haven't managed them particularly well, let's say, hypothetically. Why is God going to give you more when you can't handle what you have? I mean, this is the quintessential thing of like buying a lottery ticket, right? The very fact that you're buying a lottery ticket proves that you're not managing the things that you have. That's why I also have a problem with gambling. And it's really frustrating too, because I was really good at playing poker. But I have a problem with it because it is covetousness, right? I want something that I didn't earn. That's the whole reason why gambling is so exciting, is because I can get something that I didn't earn, that it wasn't mine to begin with. It's called covetousness. And to put a budget on it and say, well, I'm only going to spend $300 being covetous. Well, you know what? We don't spend $600 saying to ourselves, well, I'm only going to be adulterous for the weekend. That doesn't work. That's ridiculousness. Get rid of evil in your life. Chase after righteousness, not what the world determines as good, right, and salutary. It isn't. So there's, you can't tell me that gambling is exciting for any other reason, right? You say, well, gambling is entertainment. Well, then I would say to you, well, why is it fun? Well, because I might win big. Well, what is that then? Did you earn that big lottery hit? No. It was something that wasn't yours to begin with, and you wanted, and it wasn't yours. That's covetousness. And it's a dangerous thing. And it's why gambling leads to addiction. Right? Okay. Let's stop there because we're already over about 10 minutes. We'll pick up there. Verse 20. Verse 21 next time. And why don't we close with the word of prayer? Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for your many blessings. And we thank you for the wisdom that you have taught us today. Lord, may we be people who have relationships with people outside the congregation, with us outside the church, but let us continually come back to the church for word and for sacrament and to sharpen each other as iron sharpens iron. We pray all this in Christ's name. Amen. Have a wonderful rest of your day, even though it is a little gloomy and rainy. The Lord bless and keep you.